recognize this. Last fall? It's been a while, hasn't it? Yeah, when you called me, yeah. Well, thanks for having me here. I don't need the, can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So shoemaking, wow, what a subject. And I have limited it to 18th and 19th century period, because you could talk about footwear from now till eternity, especially all over the world. And it has gone through many, many changes over the hundreds of years. But anyway, what we're talking about now is shoes, and you'll notice the picture on the table here. Anybody recognize that building?
Mm-hmm.
That is at Genesee Country Village. That is our shoe shop. That originally was a law office, and it sat on the corner of Route 15 and 5 and 20 in East Avon. It was occupied by a Mr. Tyler as a shoemaker. Originally it was a law office. We don't know what happened to the lawyer, but Mr. Tyler was in there for a time period. We don't know how long, as a shoemaker. So that's the building that we use. It's a two-story building, and we don't know a lot about it as far as whether there were shoemakers upstairs, downstairs, or whatever. I sit downstairs right in front of the window. Now, if that was built as a shoe shop, there would have been windows all the way around, just like this, you know. And for what reason? So you could see what you're doing. And you sat right in front of a window. Remember, you can't do a lot by candlelight or oil lamp. Mm-hmm. And we had no fluorescent lights. I often I fool the kids when they come in there. I said, could you flick the light switch there? It's kind of dark in here today. And they look around and look around, can't find a light switch. Well, that's why the shoemakers or any of the trades would sit in front of a window to see what they're doing. So anyway, I brought a lot of tools. I'm not going to be able to talk about all of them, but I'll show you some of those that are used most often by a shoemaker. The first thing I want to do, what's the difference between a shoemaker and a cobbler?
Cobbler repairs.
Thank you very much. Not everybody knows that. I didn't know that. A cobbler repairs shoes. A shoemaker makes the shoe. There's a big difference in the skill set between a cobbler and a shoemaker. Basically, a cobbler rips off the old soles and heels and nails on new ones. That's his primary job, of boots also. People come in and say, oh, my grandfather was a shoemaker. Most likely, he just repaired his own shoes, just like my grandfather did. He had one of these tools in the closet.
Yeah.
My grandpa, Chris.
Okay.
He had one of these, and that's my cousin Gary, by the way. Say hi, Gary.
Hi, Gary.
My grandfather, Christian Dell, he had one of these in the closet, and he would drag it out now and then, and it's called a cobbler's foot. And there's a reason why they were cast iron, because and these were replaceable, so you could put different size shoes. Say if you had a size 12, you put the size 12 on here. If you're doing a size 7, put the size 7 on here. Stand was usually nailed to the floor, so it didn't move around. But you put the shoe on that, or boot. My grandpa had boots. And you put the shoe on that, and then you, after you ripped the sole off and the heel that was all worn out, you used it as a pattern to cut out a new sole out of heavy leather. And then you nailed on the new sole. When the tip of the nail went through the leather to the inside of the shoe, it hit that cast iron in there and bent over, so it's not sticking in your foot. Made sense, right? That's why these are made of cast iron. Now, the difference is, I'm probably not going in the order that I wanted to, but I'm just going to keep going. Anybody know what this is?
It's a mold the leather about.
It's the last.
Yeah.
It's a shoe last. This is what a shoe is made on. All shoes are still made on lasts. Even your sneakers are made on last, except they're not wood anymore, they're plastic. The shoe has to be made on a last to keep the shape of the shoe as it's being made. Sneakers the soles are glued on under heat and pressure, where originally They were sewn on, and then the heel was nailed on. But it has to be in a last to keep the shape. Then when the shoe is finished, see the hole right there? You took the last puller, put it in the hole, put it between your feet, and jerked the last out of the shoe. Then you build another one on the shoe. You can see the nail holes in these lasts from all the shoes that were made on it. These are all original. What's the difference between that last and this last, Gary?
One is handed, one is left-handed and right-handed?
Yes. This is what's called a straight last. This was the norm up until probably after the Civil War, 1860s. Then they started going left and right shoes. Where this shoe, you could put the shoe on either foot, called a straight last shoe.
Wow.
It was easier on the shoemaker because you only had to have one last. Here, you have to have a pair of last, a left and a right. Okay? That's the difference. This is also how you can date these. If you find these in antique shops, if it's a left or right, and you can see the difference of it. Or if it's straight, this is earlier,
Okay.
maybe more valuable. This is later. So that's a good way to date them. All these shoes I'm showing you here are straight last. See, you can't tell whether it's left or right.
Oh, yeah.
You can't tell if it's left or right. Here's one I made. Can't tell if it's left or right because I made it on this last right here. Size 13 last that I ordered from England. There it is. I've made a number of shoes on that last. I figure if I'm going to make shoes, I might as well make my own size, right? So, but I have made smaller ones. I've made children's shoes too. But I'll talk about these a little later because these are different as far as how they were made, and we'll get into that. This is the style, by the way, of the time period that I work at Genoese Country Village. The building's from 1820, but I think it probably went up through 1850 probably or more. This is the style of men's shoe of that time period. It's called a brogan, and it's a high, it's also called a booty. It's not a low quarter. I don't have any low quarters. You know, a low quarter, like a loafer. This is the quarter of the shoe, the back, and that's where the quarter is low, like a standard shoe, like I have on. This is a little higher, so it's a miniature boot. It's not a full-size boot. That's why it's called a booty. And if you look at Civil War shoes, they're very similar to this. This is what was issued to the soldiers in the Civil War, called a Jefferson booty. Why is it called a Jefferson booty?
Thomas Jefferson?
Yes. Why? Why is it called a Jefferson booty? When he was inaugurated, he wanted to relate to the common man. So instead of wearing fancy low-quarter brogans, like a lot of our founding fathers were wearing at that time, you know, with the fancy silver buckle and all that. You look at all the pictures of our founding fathers. They all had their knee breeches and their stockings and their brogans with a fancy buckle. Well, he wanted to relate to the common man at his inauguration, so he wore tie shoes. That's why they call it a Jefferson booty. Okay? Little fact
Yeah,
that you probably didn't need to know. Okay, where are we? First thing you do when you make a shoe, just like you make anything, a dress, shirt, moccasins. I've made moccasins, patterns. You take a pattern of the shoe. Here's the vamp or the front of the shoe. This is for my size 13. Here's the back of the shoe called a quarter. One of each, one on each side. Here's the sole of the shoe, size 13. Here's what's called the counter, which is a reinforcement of the heel in the back. Okay, all those things. Here's a heel cutout. Okay, you lay your leather on the upper part of the shoe, which is thinner than the sole, usually about 6 ounce. Leather is measured, the weight of leather is measured nowadays in ounces. That is how how much does a square foot of leather this thick weigh? And they 6 ounces, and that's 6-ounce leather. That's how it's done nowadays. Back then it might have been done a little different. But anyway, this is your 6-ounce leather, which is not real heavy, it's bendable. So this is for the upper of the shoe, okay? You would trace that out on a table called a clicking table. Why is it called a clicking table? Here's what you're cutting it out with. A round knife or a head knife. Hear that sound? It's like a clicking. I can imagine in a shoe shop, you got a number of people working at the clicking bench. You probably hear that sound. That's probably why they call it clicking. That's what cutting out of leather is called. Nowadays, even sneakers, all the shoes you wear are cut out with an automatic press, usually chunk chunk, either electric, pneumatic, but they're cutting out probably hundreds of pieces of the shoe at one time, but it's all done automatically. Back then, after you traced the part of the shoe using a scratch awl, it just scratches a line in the leather. You go around the pattern. Then you cut it out using the head knife. It's also called a round knife. It's also called, what's in the night sky? A moon knife, because it looks like the half moon. I love the names of tools and stuff. Okay, so you got your parts cut out. Yes, ma'am?
When the leather is cut, is it one piece at a time, or do they
One
stack?
piece.
It's just
One piece at a time, yes.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, good question. Especially when you go to cut out the bottom sole. Look at the thickness of that. It's almost like wood, it's that thick. That's about 12 or 13 ounce leather. That's the bottom sole. Okay, that goes on last. Well, actually the heel goes on last, but this gets sewn on last after the rest of the shoe is sewn. And you need a very sharp knife to cut this out. Yeah, so sharpening of knives is very important in leather working. It's true in a lot of trades. Probably what the apprentice did. Shops were set up just like nowadays. You had the master of the shop, you had journeymen, which are experienced shoemakers, carpenters, harness makers, whatever the trade is, journeymen. And there's a reason they're called journeymen, because they would journey to different places, something like that. No, it means day. It means day in French. Does anybody speak French? Yeah, it means day worker. That's what it means, day worker, journeyman. Then you had the apprentice, who is starting out learning the trade. Oftentimes the children of whoever worked there, and learning the trade literally from the ground up, because his first job was probably to sweep the shop and keep it in order. But sharpening tools was probably one of his first things he did, because that is very important to keep your tools sharp. Okay, you've got your say you got your upper parts cut out. Now what you've got to do, and I'm going to sit down and show you. I will get to talk about that little machine right there in a minute. It's only 150 years old, and I still use it. Anybody know what that is?
Is the word horse involved?
Yes.
Is the word
It's a
horse?
stitching horse.
Horse.
Yes, very good. That's a stitching horse, and I'm sure it's 150 years old. That resided over in the town of Wheatland for many, many years, and then it was donated to the Genoese Country Village. Yep. So anyway, the shoemaker would sit at his bench, and he would employ a apparatus called a stirrup. And this would go, in fact, I've got to put this, okay, I'm getting ahead of myself here. I need that round block there. What I've got to do is sew the upper of the shoe together. So this is called a closing block. See how it's round on the top? That's duplicating the back of the shoe. See that? The round part, back of the shoe. So that goes on my knee right here. The other part of takes me a minute to get it set up. Once you're set up, you're good to go. You set up your stirrup under your foot. Oh, I gotta go to the next hole. Down in this area. And then the closing block sits right on your knee. A little bit looser. How long do you think it would take a shoemaker to make a pair of shoes? That's a question I get almost daily up there. And how much did they cost? Any idea how long it would take to make a pair of
You
shoes?
mean hours, the number of hours?
Yeah. Remember, it's all handwork. I don't have a machine. When was the sewing machine invented?
Mid-1800s.
Yeah, close, 1840s.
Yeah.
Probably wasn't in widespread use till the middle of the 1800s. So here we are, 1820, the sewing machine hasn't been invented yet. So everything had to be done by hand. So okay, here's where the shoe's being made. What I'm doing is called closing. I'm taking the parts, the back of the shoe, which is the upper, well, the whole thing is an upper, but the back is called the quarter. And here we've got two pieces that make up the quarter, so it has to be sewn up to the back. Now sometimes the whole quarter is one piece, but most often, and you'll look at the original old shoes, it was two pieces, so it had to be sewn up the back. And that's what the closing is all about. In the closing, what is this called and how do you spell it? Yes.
A-W-L?
Yes. This is what I often, when the kids come in, they line up in front of me. I'll find one of them and pick on, spell this, and they get this faraway look on their face, and I'll say, spell this all. And of course, most of them say, but don't ever assume that none of them know how to spell it, and it's usually girls that they'll just say AWL. Say, where did you learn that? I read it.
Yeah.
And where did you read it? On Little House on the Prairie book. Yeah, most of the time, because one of the characters in that is a shoemaker. Anyway, so this is what you use as an awl. Of course, you cannot put a needle through leather. No matter how hard you try, you're not going to do it. Harness needles, what I use to sew the leather, are dull on the tip. You don't have to. They're dull because you don't force the needle through the leather. You make a hole first using an awl, whether you're a shoemaker, a harness maker, a bookmaker, anybody working with leather, the awl makes the hole. So, the awl makes the hole. You take a thread made of linen. Linen thread is extremely strong. Don't use anything but linen. The other option is hemp, if you have hemp thread. But most things made back then, hand-stitched, harness, shoes, bags, whatever, saddles, linen thread. Linen is extremely strong. Cotton is not strong enough. So linen is extremely strong. What I usually do with the kids, again, I'll take a spool of linen thread as it comes off the spinning wheel. And I'll ask them, did you see the spinning wheel? See the lady spinning the flax today? And that's what you get, is a single ply of thread off the spinning wheel. It breaks fairly easily. You put 3 or 4 of those together and you can't break it. And so it's extremely strong. And that's what you use. You do what's called a saddle stitch, a thread with a needle on each end. You take your awl, make a hole in one side. I usually start with the left, in one side, back through the same hole from the right side and pull it. A hole, left, right, pull. Hole, left, right, pull. Don't make a whole bunch of holes and then do it. It's usually, maybe you could do 2 holes. You don't want to get ahead of yourself, and this is true of any stitching in leather. Hole, stitch, and you don't ever set your awl down. The awl switches hands, it stays right in your hand, and an experienced shoemaker, harness maker, saddler, he'll do the same thing. It's amazing how fast you can go, and that looks just like, if it's well done, it looks just like it was done with a machine.
The thread is on the awl.
Pardon me?
The thread is on the awl. When you go like
Nope.
this, you're
Nope.
not threading.
Nope, the awl makes a hole, and then you got a thread with a needle on each end.
Oh,
Left, right, pull. Then you, another hole, left, right, pull.
okay.
Nope. No, the thread is not on the awl. I've got all kinds of different awls. And the difference is being the size of them, depending on what you're doing. Here's a very large one. That's used for the bottom sole, because you're using a thicker thread, and you have to make a bigger hole. So you use a larger awl. You'll notice that the tip of the awl is curved. That's a typical shoemaking awl. There's the different procedures in making shoes calls for that tip of the awl to be curved, as opposed to a harness maker's awl, which is straight, because he's going straight through a strap of harness. Where a shoemaker may be going in one side and coming back out the same side, just like I'm doing here. So that's why the awl is curved like that. Another good thing, if you find these in an antique shop, curved awls are shoemaker's awls, straight awls are harness maker's awls. Yep, that's the difference there. And I love, again, these are both original, and you find these in antique shops all the time. And I love collecting them. And here's another thing you find a lot, and some of the places don't know what they are shoemaking hammers. These are not for hammering nails. These are for hammering leather. That's what that big flat area is for. Also this, say when I'm done doing this seam on this, see that end on there? The seam will be a little bit raised. I'll wet the leather, use that end first to break down that hump. Then go with this side, that flattens it out. And that's, don't ever use this for nailing nails. There is another tool for nailing nails, which are right here. These are multi-tools. You think multi-tools are new? No, they had them back then. This is called, these are lasting pliers. This is for stretching the upper of the shoe over the wooden last and then temporarily nailing it to the last, and this is why the lasts are made of wood. So you can nail into it and hold everything in place until you stitch. Then you pull your nails out. So this is not only for stretching the leather over, it's for nailing the little nail, and it's for extracting nails. So it has actually 3 purposes. Here's another form of the same thing, just a different shape. There's the hammer right there. Stretch that over, and these are, again, over 100 years old, I'm sure. Okay. Oh, I forgot to put on when I do my stitching, manacle, not monocle. Monocle's for the eye. The manacle is a leather glove that you wear, and a harness maker especially would wear this, because that linen thread will cut into your hand if you're not careful. So that's why you wear a leather glove or manacle when you pull the thread, especially a harness maker or the shoemaker when he's working with the very heavy thread when you're sewing on the bottom sole. See the knob on the end of that's not for decoration. You wrap the thread around that for this side. The other side, you use your hand and pull it tight. That's what that knob is. All these awls have knobs on the end, and that's the purpose of them. They're not for decoration. They're for a purpose. Any questions? I know I'm confusing a lot of you, but I'm trying to be as clear.
On one hand?
Yes, because the awl, you don't need it on the awl side.
Okay, so you just
You wrap the thread around that knob, and you pull it like this, so it's not
touching.
even touching your hand. it's around this.
But when you switch back and do you sew right and left or just from one side? So you're gonna use the glove just on this hand
I
only?
only use it on this side, yes, because this side has got the awl, my awl hand is like that.
Okay, so you only sew from one side then?
No, I sew from both sides. I put in the left first, right, and then pull it. This thread goes right here on this side, and it's around the awl knob on this
Oh, I
side,
see.
and I pull it.
I see.
And if I didn't have the glove on, it could cut into my finger right there.
So the thread you use is not the stuff that comes off the spinning wheel, it's a number of them put together?
Yes, good question. Usually, now some of the thread I buy, it's already been manufactured. This is a 3-ply, so it's 3 of those put together. I usually do a 6 on that thread that comes right off the spinning wheel, about a 6 on the upper, and then I'll use an 8-ply on the sole, because you want it a little heavier.
Where do you get something like that? I mean,
Well, at the village, we make it ourselves up there with the flax that we grow.
oh wow.
But you can buy linen thread online. You can buy it a lot of places, you know, because there's still people, believe it or not, that do this. And like saddle makers and harness makers, they still use that. I know that nylon is out there if you want to use it, but I still like the natural linen is amazing. Make sure you wax it using beeswax.
Ooh, so
The
you
thread.
wax it before you put it on?
Yes. Also, I don't have any with me, but there's shoemakers usually would make and use what's called black ball or hand wax. It's made of pine pitch, pine resin, beeswax, different things. It's cooked into a black round ball. It's called shoemaker's wax or black ball. And that's usually traditionally what's used. It's very tacky, and what it does, it makes the stitch waterproof. Makes the thread
That's what I
waterproof.
was wondering about.
Yes.
So do you have to, once you have the shoes, do you have to do something to them to keep
Not
them?
usually afterwards, no, no. Because the soles are treated after the whole shoe is made. You treat the soles with beeswax and that black ball and different recipes of things. You actually heat tools called burnishing tools like that. They're heated over an alcohol stove. And then the edges of the soles are rubbed or burnished to make them very smooth and hard. You also burnish the bottom of the sole using a burnishing stick. Say if the shoe was here, you have it like this, and then you rub the bottom of the sole to make it very hard, shiny, and that will make the sole last longer. Okay, you would think that, you know, it makes it slippery. Sure, it makes it slippery, but the main thing was it made the bottom sole last longer. Now, how long did shoes last with leather soles? Anybody got any leather soled shoes? I've got a pair of dress shoes that are still leather soled, and I have a pair of cowboy boots that have leather soles, but I don't wear them all the time either, and I don't walk in them much.
Right.
Back then, they had no choice. They didn't have rubber, so you wore out those soles very quickly. Usually, if you wore the shoe all year, you'd probably get a year to a year and a half out of the soles before you had to have the soles replaced and the heels. There's where you went to the cobbler. Gave him your worn out shoes, he'd replace the soles and heels. Oftentimes also, cobblers went door to door, just like tinkers went door to door. Tinker, you know what a tinker is? He's a guy that went door to door with his little cart, you know, probably did a lot of rattling as he went down the road with his horse-drawn cart, selling used tinware and repairing tinware. Tinkers are like wannabe tinsmiths, and I often called cobblers kind of wannabe shoemakers. But they were very necessary people. Even in the army, they had cobblers that would follow the troops around because it was constant repair of shoes and boots, as well as harness and everything else that was made of leather, yeah.
If the shoemaker was left-handed, would they do the exact same thing or
Probably.
reverse?
Probably reverse.
They would reverse it?
Probably,
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
And I have a friend that was a shoemaker at Colonial Williamsburg for a while, and I still remember him saying that. He says, if you had 10 shoemakers, every one of them does things a different way. They have their own techniques, but basically it's the same. You're accomplishing the same thing. It's just you might have had a different way to do it. So that's what the wisdom I got out from him. He doesn't work there anymore, but he was an excellent shoemaker at Colonial Williamsburg. Hopefully the shoe shop is still open there. Anybody been there recently? Okay.
So we never did answer the question, how long does it take to?
Well, I let you have time to think about it.
Oh, okay.
I think we have to hear the whole thing, what you have to do.
Yeah, I
Yes.
wondered about
Because
that.
we
Good
can't
idea.
figure it out.
Good idea.
I'm already up to 30 hours just on what he's
You're getting
talking.
close.
So we gotta see the finished product here.
So anyway, once the upper is made and sewn together, that is the vamp, which is the front of the shoe, and the quarters, then those are sewn together, and there's your upper, okay? Now, this upper is, like I was talking about, a low quarter. See, it's not high, so it's a low quarter. Similar to, in fact, this is a buckle shoe, similar to what would be worn during the 18th century, with a buckle instead of a tie shoe. See the flaps here? Then you would fit a buckle on this. You could often tell the status of a person by how fancy his buckle was. If it was sterling silver, he was quite wealthy, but if it was just plain old nickel or something, some other cheap metal, iron or something, then he wasn't quite up that social ladder, you know what I mean? So anyway, now you've got your upper. Now what you do is you take your last. You notice this last is 2 parts. In fact, that other one there is 2 parts also. To get this out of the shoe, when you're done with the shoe, sometimes it's difficult. So if you made a 2-part last, that is cut it in half like that, you can see the line there. It's temporarily nailed together as you're making the shoe, but then pull the nail when you're ready to pull it out. Take this part out first, then the bottom part comes out a lot easier. And that's the reason for the 2-part lasts, like this one, like that one there. You can see that's a 2-part last also. And some of them are 1 part, so you just deal with it. This originally was a 1-part last, but I cut it because I was having trouble getting it out of the shoe when I finished the shoe. You notice the leather pieces on here? And this is true of, that's an original last there. It's also got a leather piece kind of nailed on it. This is a fitting of the last. That is, if you want to make this measurement right here, which is your instep right here. That's your instep. That's a very important measurement right there. If you wanted to make that larger around, you added leather to that spot, you see, and then that made that area larger when the shoe was finished. So that's a whole reason for adding this. I also added a piece of leather to the back here, which made it just about 1/4 of an inch longer, you see, when the shoe is done. It's called fitting. So anyway, now we're gonna start making the shoe by cutting out, it's similar to the bottom sole, but not such thick leather as that, what's called the insole. This is what your foot is resting on the inside of the shoe. This is not what you're walking on. It's the insole, it's inside. The whole shoe everything is sewn to the insole. If you didn't have that, you couldn't make the shoe. The bottoms, the upper is sewn to that, and then what's called the welt goes around, and then the bottom sole is sewn to the welt. That's basic shoemaking. It's still the way it's done. It's just that now everybody wears sneakers, and you don't do that with sneakers. Everything's glued together. But if you're doing a hand-sewn shoe, or even a machine-sewn shoe, that's still the basic way a shoe is put together. With an insole, with a welt, and with the bottom sole and the upper, it's all sewn together. So again, here we use the stirrup to hold this right on the shoemaker's knee. And again, I gotta adjust this again. And that's where the shoe is made. So again, he's starting with the insole, and he's sewing, pre-punching the holes all the way around, then taking the last and fitting it, even though this isn't the right size for this last. You're taking your lasting pliers, stretching the last over the insole, and temporarily nailing it with little iron nails all the way around. remember, those nails don't stay in. As you sew this, you pull the nails out. Just like when you're sewing a dress, you're pinning everything. As you sew, you pull the pins out. All the nails are doing is holding everything in place until you sew. Once those are, the bottom or the last is sewn to the insole, then you take a 1-inch piece of leather, and I don't have any, but it's similar to this strap right here, about 1 inch wide. That's called the welt. This is why these are called welted shoes. You've heard the word welt before? Any of you that sew, you probably have heard that word. What the welt is what the bottom sole is sewn to. Okay? You understand that? When that's all done, the heel is cut out and the heel is nailed on. The heels are nothing more than layers, usually about 3 layers of the heavy sole leather put together. Nailed on. You can nail from this side or you can nail from the inside down. Then comes the finishing work, which is dyeing the leather. Of course, back then you could have any color as long as it's black, just like your Ford. And colors weren't real popular back then. In the 18th century, women, high-class women had colored shoes. Yellow, blue, green, different ones. That's the only time you saw colors was in ladies' shoes. Men's shoes were all black, every one of them. And even in the 1800s, all black. So
the women's shoes, they were silk?
Sometimes, yes, they were made of fabric. The upper of the shoe was often either made of fabric or covered in fabric.
So that's how they got the color?
No, the color would have been a straight, solid color would have been a dye of some
Would
kind.
have been a dye?
Yes.
Even the leather?
Yes. Oh, yes. Yeah, the leather dye. Mm-hmm. So back then, the dye that they used was probably very toxic. It might have had lead in it or something, or mercury or something, who knows. Nowadays, we just use a safe leather dye, you know, that works very nicely. Okay, once you've dyed the leather, then you have to finish the shoe. Again, remember the burnishing tool where you heat this over a lamp, apply your beeswax and different compounds of wax and dye and different things, and rubbed it into the edge of the sole and also the bottom. The bottom is usually left natural on most of the shoes, but the edges and the edges of the heel are all burnished. It's called burnishing or glazing, another word for it. Then I didn't mention measuring. You know, what's the difference when somebody comes into the shop? Well, people ask at the shop, say, was this, did you just walk in the shop and order a pair of shoes and then wait and he would make them? Well, depending on the shop. Some shops were nothing more than little shoe factories where shoes were made and then wholesaled to the mercantile or the general store. I think the shop that I work in at Genesee Country Village was like that. I think most of them were like that. The other type of shop, which was most likely located in a large city where there was more money, was what's called a bespoke shop or bespoken shop. Have you heard that word? Mm-hmm. That's where the customer walked in. It could be any shop, not just a shoe shop. Walked in, told the proprietor what he wanted, spoke it, bespoke. What does he want? Well, then you measured the customer's foot using a size stick just like this. We have 2 of these. These are original. These are children's shoes up to size 13 and adult shoes up to size 13. That's the length of your shoe. You know, you go in a shoe shop or shoe store, used to be, not so much anymore. You had that metal thing you put your foot in, and it always tickled my bottom of my foot. And then the shoe guy would slide it to get the width of the shoe. Well, here's how you got the width of the shoe. You put your stocking foot on a piece of brown paper and trace the outline of your shoe, because that little pencil here, traced it, there's your footprint. Then he made measurements on your foot, he would measure in usually 3 places, right up here, back here, and like I said, the instep, which is right here. If you touch your foot, you can feel a little kind of a bone right there. That's the instep, and that's the most important measurement. You probably measure it with a string and then lay it out on a measuring stick to get your instep measurement. He would send those measurements down the street to the shoe last maker. Most shoemakers did not make their own lasts. That was a whole trade in itself, shoe last making. There was one big business in Rochester, and I can't tell you who it was, but I had a man come in and say he used to work there. They made shoe lasts, and they sold them all over the world. Rochester was big deal on clothing, shoes, you know, the whole thing. It was a big deal in Rochester. The shoe last would have been made by a woodworker. He might have done nothing but shoe last, but very likely he also did other woodworking. So those measurements were sent to him. He would return the finished last to the shoemaker. The shoemaker would take and number it, usually, and either hang it from the ceiling, depending on if it was a pair of shoe lasts like the left and right, or a single one, number it, and in a book was a number with your name. So this was yours. So anytime you wanted a shoe, you went to the shoemaker, he grabbed your last, you didn't have to measure your foot again. Sometimes these lasts were put in drawers, and there's a picture somewhere that I saw, the whole wall of the shoe shop was little drawers with like numbers on them. Pull the drawer open, there's a pair of lasts in the drawer. There were hundreds of them in this picture. I can't remember where I saw it. Anyway, so then shoemaker had the last. He would make the shoe. Any guesses on how long it would take the shoemaker to make a pair of shoes?
50, 60 hours?
Well, I talked to my friend who did it down in Williamsburg. He said, how long would it take to make a pair? He said, well, I can get one shoe made in a day, maybe get started on the second one. But then what happens is the sun goes down and I can't see what I'm doing. So he could not make a pair in one day. 2 to 3 days probably by the time he had all the finishing work and all that done, very likely 2 to 3 days to make a pair of shoes. How much did that pair of shoes sell for in 1850? And I have proof of that because I have a ledger book, and in there, it's from 1900, but I don't think things changed that much from 1850 to 1900. There's prices of shoes, boots, children's shoes, men's shoes, ladies' shoes in there.
1750.
Nope, too much.
Too much?
$10.
$5 on boots, $2 to $3 on adult shoes
Wow.
per pair.
Wow.
Children's shoes were $1 a pair or less.
Wow.
Yeah. So, however, what did I make as a shoemaker? What was my salary in 1850?
Half of that?
$1 to $1.50 a day.
A day?
So I had to work 3 days to buy a pair of shoes for myself. Yeah, $1 to $1.50 a day, which was a pretty good wage back then. Most people made pennies a day. If you were like a miner, field worker, farmer, or subsistence farmer, miners or road workers, pennies a day. So $1 a day was a pretty good wage. That's $200 or $300 a year. And so I did pretty well having a skill. So I had something that was worth something, you know. This is why I taught my son how to be a shoemaker too, so he would have to make a nice living, you know. So that's how.
How
it
did
was.
you learn?
Where did I learn?
How did you learn?
Just by doing it. So I
Oh,
did leather
You didn't
work.
go to school? You didn't?
No, I did
Oh.
leather work. I've done leather work for a while, and then about 7 or 8 years ago, I started doing the shoes 2 days a week in the shoe shop, and it's just by doing it. I kind of knew how it was done. I watched people do it, and it's just a lot of practice. That's all it is.
So you're
Just-
making shoes that are walking around now somewhere?
Well,
They're not
not
sitting
really,
on-
because I only make my size.
Oh.
I only make my size, and I'm not selling them, because otherwise I'd have to get a lot of money for this. I'm not selling this pair for $2 to $3.
No.
Or like $200 to $300 maybe, even more. But this is one that I made, and it's not perfect, but it's not bad. Seeing as I didn't have any formal training, but it takes a lot of time. It takes me pretty much all season to make one shoe
Yeah.
in the shoe shop, because of course I'm only in there 2 days a week, and I'm constantly talking, and that interrupts your work.
So that black shoe was their color when you were making
Yes.
it? And you dyed
Yeah, I dyed it.
And
Yeah,
you dyed it?
Yep. Mhm. Okay, here's what I want to mention. Remember, we were talking, I mentioned a welted shoe. That is a shoe that's entirely hand stitched, including the bottom sole. I'm not going to get into how the technique is done on that, because it's kind of involved. But both of these are welted shoes. I did not make this shoe. This is an extremely well-made welted shoe. But notice the style is very similar, except it's a smaller size. This is also what a lady might have used, especially a working lady. Say if you were a store clerk, farm wife, she would have worn something like this. And why this upper, why this booty? Kept the stones and the dirt out of your shoes. Because you can imagine working in the garden or even in the house with a low quarter, you're constantly taking the stones and the dirt out of your shoes. This is the advantage of a higher shoe like that, called a booty. So that's very typical what a lady would have worn also. Unless she's a formal wear, she would have worn a low, like a flat or something. Sometimes they didn't even have heels on them. They were just a flat, or sometimes they did have heels. And this is where you also would get into the upper of a shoe. On a formal shoe for a lady, the upper would be made of fabric, like silk or something like that, called a turn shoe. Most likely, they were sewn inside out and turned. I can't tell you the technique on that. I haven't made one yet, but they were quite easy to make. If you ever get a chance to go to Genesee Country Museum and visit the Whaley Gallery, we have the green collection of clothes and including original shoes, and it's an amazing collection. You can see all the different styles, or not so much styles, but colors of shoes, and ladies' shoes, boots, children's shoes. We have everything from underwear to formal wear, everything in between, men and women. And it's an amazing collection. Most of it looks like it was made yesterday. So if you haven't been in the gallery at the Genesee Country Village, make sure you go and see the green collection of clothing. Peter Wisby will probably talk about that. He's a great guy, and he knows everything about the collection because he's the main curator there at the village. Yep.
What about socks? I mean, you had socks underneath
Yes, you did.
it? I mean,
Yes,
what-
a man would have worn a pair of fairly heavy, probably wool socks with your shoes. Leather shoes are quite comfortable. They're very forgiving, and I have a pair that I wear. I don't have them here. They're pretty beat up, and I've replaced the soles like 3 times, and they're similar to this. And I put a Dr. Scholl's inside just to make them a little more comfortable. Nobody knows that. But, they're quite comfortable, but wear a nice pair of heavy socks with them. Yeah.
Even the women, or they had longer stockings?
Yeah,
or what?
stockings would be, you might have worn 2 pairs, especially in the wintertime. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Now, what were
Okay.
their stockings made of?
What haven't I talked about? Any questions? Yeah.
I just wondered about the heels, they're thicker.
Yes, they
So
are.
how are they pieces of leather that are
Yes.
layered?
Yes. They're nothing more than, well, this one here, I can see them 1, 2, 3 layers of the thick sole leather.
Okay.
And I actually take and glue these together just to hold them together until I nail them. And then they're nailed, after the whole other part of the shoe is made, these are nailed on. Yep. That's how they were done, and that's, I think, how like work boots, cowboy boots, still done that way. Yeah, they're nailed on. And let me see. Oh, I didn't mention, here's a couple of tools you might want to look at. You know what that is? What that's called? Well, it's similar to that,
Is it a stretcher?
but it's earlier than that.
Is that a stretcher?
Nope. This is earlier than this. This is a stitching clam or clamp it holds whatever you're working on between your legs like that. You push your legs together to hold the piece that you're sewing, so your hands are free. You know, so you can all stitch. It's called a stitching clam or clamp. I found that one in Pennsylvania with the original paint on it. And we think it could be late 18th century or early 19th century. Hand forged screws, because you can tell the slot and the screws are not quite perfectly in the center, which means they were handmade, which dates it early. Yeah, a friend that I know, he knows about that stuff. He says, yeah, it's about 1810 or something like that. I said, okay. Now this is my lovely stitching horse. Shoemaker may not have used something like this, but a harness maker would have used this. This was donated to the village by a friend of mine in Scottsville. His mother had it. She found it in an antique shop. One of the legs was missing, so my friend Irv, who was a wood turner, turned one of the legs, and you can't even tell which one it is, and one of the stretchers also he turned. And then I replaced the leather belt on it, used the original hardware, and I put a cushioned seat on it, made a nice deerskin seat. We know that it originally had a cushioned seat on it because you could see the nail holes along the edge of the seat. There was nothing on the seat. Most of these did have some kind of a cushioned seat on it. So you sat at this, and again, put your work, whatever you're working on, between the clams. It's run by a pedal down here. And the neat thing is that you lock it in. Now that's secure. Now you have your hands free for stitching, and it's right at the right level. See that?
Yeah.
Why do you think it was tilted to the side like that? See that? And this is also replaceable. I can't get this out right now, but you could replace this clam part and put a different one in there. There's a little pin down here that this will come out. Why do you think it's tilted like this?
So you can
This is why I know it was used by a harness maker.
So you can see what you're.
What's one of the most important parts of a horse harness? The collar. It's for making horse collars. The collar hung down here on the outside. That's why it's tilted like this. I have a picture of a guy sitting at one of these, and it's exactly what he's doing. He's working on a horse collar. You sewed it up, you stuffed it with horsehair, believe it or not, with horsehair, and then you sewed it up, and the collar would be hanging down here, and this is why it's tilted to the side like this. So we know that these were used that way. Interesting part is, I didn't notice this when I first got it, but then I said, oh, wow, there's an inscription down here. This thing was made by the J.D. Randall Company of Cincinnati, Ohio, and I looked that up. They're not still in business, but most of these were made around 1870 starting, because these showed up in the Montgomery Ward and the Sears catalogs.
Oh, wow.
So we know it's a little later.
Yeah.
So this thing is about 150 years old, and I still use it. So, and I've got 2 or 3 of them at the village that we accumulate all these antiques, and we can't accept everything, but I've got about 4 more of these at the village. One that I'm restoring, and the other ones are in pretty bad shape. But
What's the leather on that?
this leather is deerskin.
No, I see the string.
Well, this
The
is one.
leather down on the side. Right there, right where
Oh,
you're.
here.
No,
It's
no,
a belt.
no,
You see,
no,
that's
no,
what
no.
that's
No, on the other side.
here.
Yeah,
Oh, this.
yeah, the little piece of leather.
Thank you for asking. There's a little knob there that holds the end of the strap, and originally the end of the strap was screwed in, but it was catching, the thread was catching on that when I was sewing, so I put this piece of leather here to prevent that. That wouldn't have been on there originally,
Okay.
so I just adapted
Because I
that.
see a spring in between.
Yeah, well, there is a spring. That's when you open it, so it springs open. Yeah. But I use that all winter long in my shop at home. Yep.
You mentioned the green collection of clothing at the museum.
Yes.
Is that climate control?
Yes, it is.
Wow.
We have a whole big room
Wow.
that's climate controlled because we have more stuff than you can put on display, and they change the displays regularly.
Okay.
And so everything is under climate controlled conditions. Yes.
But if you go to the
Beautiful.
gallery, in that room, underneath the glass cases, where
Yes.
things are actually
Like
on
drawers.
dummies, so to
Yes.
speak,
Mhm.
or forms, there are drawers
Yeah,
that are, just full of all that, the small stuff.
Yep.
So you make sure you pull the drawers
Okay.
up
Yeah.
and look at it.
Thank
see
you.
the shoes, the
Okay.
underwear, everything
All that.
else that's
Thank you,
under
thank
there.
you.
And some jewelry and
Yeah.
cufflinks, and it's just, you know, boot hooks.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's
yeah,
amazing.
Yeah,
To see the
Wow.
things existing, that it still exists. I mean, she was amazing in keeping all that stuff.
wow.
It's about 30, the whole collection, including what the museum already had, I think it's about 3,500 pieces.
Is it really that many?
Wow.
Wow, I know it's a
Ooh.
lot.
Now, what's the difference between like the boot hook and you've got like laces on these shoes?
Ah. Okay, the laces came along, of course, earlier in the 18th century, the buckle shoe was the fashion. But then eventually, shoes would have been laced like that. And of course, then you had to punch holes using, this is not a modern tool, this has been around forever. These are circular punch, you've seen these. And you can adjust these to different size holes. These have been around for a long time. And that's how you make the hole. But that would be a later thing when the tie shoes came into fashion.
And what's with the hooks? What's,
The hook tightens the lace. As you
Oh, you mean like,
Yeah.
well, later on in the 1800s, during the Victorian era, well, after the war, of course, everything changed. Everything was invented and styles changed. And of course, then ladies, you had to get fancy with not just your clothing, but your shoes. And then you got into colors of boots and high top shoes and pointed toes, and it wasn't just this plain old, like this all the time. It was fashionable. And so yes, then you had to lace up those shoes, and there were shoe hooks, and you can see these. You'll find these in antique shops all the time. And that must have been quite a thing, getting dressed with you have to lace
you
up.
have to just
Yes.
use the hook to
Well,
pull it?
Even in the 18th century, of course, you had the stays and the things. The ladies used all those things to make you look really pretty and fashionable.
19
Men too, men did it too.
19-inch waist.
Yes, men had corsets, oh yes.
So for the sizing of shoes, has it always been in America, the numbers we use?
Yes.
And then in Europe and the other countries, the other numbers?
Well, at least in our country, the sizes are the same. They've been the same for couple hundred years or more,
Okay.
probably. Even half sizes. A lot of times these lasts would indicate the size on these lasts, usually in Roman numerals, and with a slash after it is half.
Oh,
So if it's a
okay.
12 in a Roman numeral with a slash, that's 12 and a half.
Okay.
And that was kind of the standard of how you labeled these. The funny thing is, though, a lot of these original lasts I can't find any markings on them but I have seen those with these markings of what the size is on it. But I just measure, I put it in the measuring stick, and so, okay, this is a 7, this is an 8, whatever. And, yeah. What else? Okay, here's a date for you, and it does relate to shoemaking. October 25th. What do we celebrate on October 25th? I usually start the talk with this, but I'll end it with this. It's a holiday. St. Crispin's Day. Any of you read Shakespeare?
Guess not, no hands are
Nobody
going
reads
up.
Shakespeare?
Guess not.
Anybody ever heard of Henry V? Shakespeare's Henry V?
Yes.
He came after Henry the Fourth?
Yeah, that's the
Okay,
one.
okay.
Well, if you read Henry V, I know the speech, not right now, but I have memorized it. It's the famous speech that Henry V gave at the Battle of Agincourt. And this happened, this was real. And it was a pep talk to his troops that were greatly outnumbered fighting the French. And so he gave this famous St. Crispin's Day speech where he mentions St. Crispin's Day, I think 5 or 6 times in the speech. Anyway, St. Crispin is the patron saint of shoemakers. Yeah. And the story, I won't get into the story, but I think they were Italian. In fact, I think they were twins, Crispinazzo or something. Anyway, we celebrate them as the patron saints of shoemakers. And there's many stories and folklore that go to the shoemaker. I don't know why they picked on the shoemaker rather than the harness maker or whatever, but there's a lot of different things about the shoemakers. There's nursery rhymes about the shoes. There's stories about the shoemaker, Pinocchio, and it goes on and on and on. There was an old woman that lived in a shoe. She had, why do you think she had so many children?
The pharmacy was closed, that's all I know. It was closed that day,
I know some of you remember that when someone got married, you tied old shoes to the bumper of the car.
Oh, yeah.
Well, why would you do that? Why, when you built a house back in the 1800s, would you take an old shoe and put it in the wall when it was being built?
Good luck or something?
Yes,
Good luck.
And fertility.
Oh.
This is why the old woman that lived in a shoe had so many children.
Oh.
Because she lived in a shoe. She was very fertile. I don't know where the husband was. You don't hear about him. But she had a lot of...
She had more than one.
Yeah, could be. But anyway, the shoemaker often, here's another little story about, well, St. Crispin's Day is October 25th, and that's what the shoemakers, and I tell ladies that the way you can celebrate St. Crispin's Day is go out and buy a pair of shoes, and they're always very happy to hear that. The husbands aren't so happy, but anyway, another legend about that St. Crispin's is that a friend of St. Crispin's, of the Crispins, was St. Hugh. He was a martyr. He was a Christian that was persecuted and jailed and sentenced to death for his beliefs. St. Hugh. When he was in prison about to be executed, his fellow shoemakers came by, bringing him things to eat and stuff. He had one request that after he died of the shoemakers, his shoemaker friends, was that they would make shoemaking tools of his bones. Yeah,
Oh,
kind
my.
of gross. But anyway, that was his request. Well, this is why tools of the shoemaker are called St. Hugh's bones.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's kind of cool, isn't
It is.
it? So, any other questions? I think I've used up most of an hour.
So,
Yes.
the number of hours needed for a pair, not
Pair,
one.
that's right, a
pair.
pair
A
would be
pair.
2 to 3 days.
2 to 3
So
days.
you're cool, 48.
Yeah. And normally I gotta use the right word here now, wait a minute. The cobbler repairs, the shoemaker makes.
Yes,
So the shoemaker waited for an order, or you mentioned some would make and put them on the shelf?
it depended on the shop. If it was a bespoke shop,
They'd
he
wait
would-
for the
He would
order.
have taken the order, and then the person would have had to wait for them. He probably had many people waiting for shoes. The thing is, though, this is not a one-person job.
No,
This
no.
shop would have been full of people making shoes. This is true of many of the trades. One person couldn't do it. You had different people in the shop doing different tasks. Some were cutting out, some were sewing, some were finishing, just like any little factory.
So
People had
one,
different jobs.
one person could make the right shoe and the other make the left shoe?
Most likely, the same person worked on the same
Same
pair.
thing? Okay,
Yeah, yeah.
okay.
But you could have, now, if you were a shop that was, again, nothing more than a little shoe factory making the whole order, say for instance, the Mercantile down the street ordered 50 pairs of assorted sizes, okay, including children's shoes. There's an order, okay, they would work on that. When that order was done, they would wholesale the order to just like it's done nowadays. Just to the shoe shop, to the Mercantile, they would price them up, and sell them. And most likely, that's where you went to buy your shoes. Again, most people didn't have the money to invest in that, and that's probably where they got their shoes, yeah.
And so were they always men? Were there women shoemakers too?
I doubt if there were too many women shoemakers.
Okay,
They had other things to do.
right,
And they had other trades, that,
okay.
you know, weavers and spinners and,
Do they
Yeah.
have stories about being unionized like others?
I don't know if they were unionized or
No,
not.
no, I mean.
They could have been, I
You
can't,
don't know.
well, what they did have though were guilds,
Oh,
which is like a
guilds.
union.
Yeah, yeah.
A guild. In fact, that's a
right.
good question, because
yeah, guild.
the Shoemakers Guild
Mm-hmm.
in England has been in existence for 250 years.
Wow,
Yeah, so it's a guild, same thing as a union.
okay,
It was kind of a secretive society, and you kind of traded your ideas with your fellow guild members,
okay,
and you tried not to tell anybody outside the guild about whatever you were trying to keep secret.
right,
You know,
right,
maybe it's like, still like it is now.
right.
But, okay, here's a good question. I did not cover this, but if you were in England and, asked where the shoemaker was, they'd probably look at you and say, "You mean the cordwainer? You mean the
Say-
cordwainer?
Cord,
Cordwainer,
cord winner.
yes.
Cord,
Part of my ancestry is Lynn, Massachusetts,
Yes,
Marblehead,
the
Massachusetts.
the hub of American shoemaking.
And these old factories that I guess
Yes.
are all long burned down now, but, my direct ancestors and all their relatives worked in these shoe factories
Yes.
after the cod fishing,
Oh, yeah.
original history, became too, dangerous. They were losing too many people at sea. And a lot, I do genealogy, so a lot of them are called cordwainers.
Cordwainers, yeah.
cord winner.
And then I think some of them are called operatives,
I'm not sure about that.
and then stitchers and lasters I see.
Yes.
And both my great-grandparents worked in the factories, even though they
Interesting.
had like 5 kids at the time.
Yep.
My great-grandmother was still
Yep.
working there.
That's interesting, because that proves that different people had different jobs making shoes. Lasters would last the shoe. Burnishers would burnish the, clickers would cut them out. And so everybody had different things. I very doubt it if one person did all the different operations on one shoe. You know, so that's very good. Well, where does the word cordwainer, I always thought, I had never heard the word until I started doing this. I kind of heard cobbler, I knew about that, but you can cobble anything, you know, and not just shoes. It's like putting things together, or, you know, fixing them. But the cordwainer, where's that come from? Well, I looked it up, and I always thought it was C-O-R-D was the cord that you used to sew the shoe. No, it has nothing to do with that. Cordoba, Spain. It's in southern Spain. It's like the mecca of leather and leather-made items, boots and shoes and leather, beautiful leather and all that. Cordoba. And that's where the C-O-R-D part of the word comes from. And to wane something, I believe, means to put together or something. So cordwainer is the word that came from that. And so I test people when they come in there. It says, and in fact, we have that on our day sheet. So if you want to know the difference between a cobbler and a cordwainer, go to the shoe shop and they'll explain it to you. So I've explained that many times about it. So, in Lynn, Massachusetts, yes, the hub of American shoemaking. In 1850, American shoemakers were making over 1 million pairs of shoes a year. That's a lot of shoes handmade.
I wish they still were,
I know it.
because the stuff we have to buy now,
Yeah, it's a shame, isn't it?
yes, is so
Yeah.
uncomfortable.
Wow.
How long do these shoes last? Like if people were in the 1830s or whatever, had a pair of shoes and they had to
Yep.
work every day and they would be getting wet.
Yep. Oh, yes.
How did they handle that kind of thing? You know, the shoe is full
Well,
of
they had-
mud and wet.
Yep, they had no rubber to speak of, to make what's called a galosh. That is a covering over your shoe. That came later, probably more like the late 1800s, 1900. You had to deal with dampness and and leather attracts moisture. So it was tough, you know, to get around. Now, ladies had access to a thing called a patten. And you think of, well, patent leather? No, that's, a patten was actually an attachment that you put on the bottom of your shoe that either tied on, I think most of the time they tied on. It was like a little platform, sometimes made of metal, sometimes made of wood, called a patten. And it kept you up out of the damp mud and dirt and maybe snow. But they must have been terrible to walk on, you know, but that was one thing the ladies could do by wearing what's called a patten. The other thing was, here's another trade of the time, the other option to leather shoes were clogs. Clog making was another whole industry. Shoemakers were not clog makers. That was a clog maker made clogs, wooden soled shoes. The Dutch people in the Netherlands wear a sabot, which is a full wooden shoe. Why did they wear wooden shoes? Not for the tourists, to keep their feet dry, because in the Netherlands below sea level it's damp, and so they would wear them in the fields, and believe it or not, I've worn them. If you have a nice pair of heavy wool socks and you learn how to walk in them, they're quite comfortable. They're made of some lightweight wood like basswood or pine or something like that. That's easily carved, and then clogs are leather upper shoes with wooden soles, usually, and made by the clog maker, whole separate trade. Again, the only reason for wearing them is to keep your feet dry. I had an old gentleman came in the shop once. He says, yeah, I remember my grandfather worked in a factory, and when I was a boy, and this man was old, so that was probably back in the 1800s, late 1800s or something. As a boy, I remember going to the factory with my grandfather, and all I could hear were these wooden shoes on the brick floor. And it was probably either a brewery or a tannery or someplace where the floor was always wet. And that's what most of the employees wore. And he remembers the sound of the wooden shoes or clogs on the brick floor. It's kind of cool.
If you were to buy a pair of these shoes, or who would you go to? I know in England they advertise that you can have them. Are there people in the United States that make these shoes from scratch?
Yes.
And how much would it cost, and where would you find somebody like
If you
that?
go to the reenactments, I go to some of these reenactments. You can go to Fort Niagara. There's somebody up there called Flying Canoe. Right, Gary?
Yeah.
Flying Canoe is always at Fort Niagara around the 4th of July period. And their shoes, I think, sell for $200, $300, probably $200 or something. And they're like these. They're similar to these, but they're usually low quarter with a buckle, because that's French and Indian War, which is 18th century. But yeah, you can still buy them, and I think most of them are still handmade.
Because I have a pair of like moccasin type thing, and I can't find anybody really to redo the bottom or resew the bottom.
I've resold the bottoms of my moccasins 5 times probably.
So
I just rip off the old sole and I sew on a new sole on the moccasin using a soft cowhide or heavy deer skin, elk skin or something, which I don't have. I usually use a very thick cowhide.
So who would I contact for that?
I don't know. I do it, but I won't. I don't do it as a business. No, I don't do it as a business. Nope. I just make them for myself. But I've replaced them probably 5 times.
Well, it's a beautiful pair of shoes, but they're.
I don't know if the guy over in Henrietta does that type of work, but I know he'll repair your regular shoes, put new soles and heels. It's the cobbler's shop over on, what used to be on, you know where Growmore Farms was? Over in Henrietta on 15A. I think they're on the other side, on this side of the road now. But it's called the cobbler's shop. And yeah, I know he does repairs of regular shoes, all kinds, boots and shoes. You might check with him.
Question, are the shoe repair places slowly disappearing. There used to be
Yep.
a fellow
Yeah,
across from
there used to be
Walmart.
quite a few.
He's still there,
He's still there?
Is he there?
Okay.
but he's not getting any younger, that's for sure.
So get your shoes fixed quick.
It's a shame,
It is a shame. Yeah,
because, I mean, we're in such a disposable
it
society.
is, that you just throw them out.
Which
you know?
Walmart? The one here or the one in Grace? The one here? Thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
There's a guy over here in, Westgate,
Is there a guy in Westgate also?
backside